Hey, y'all, and welcome to a special post 4th of July episode from Noteworthy History. I'm Tong, and today I'm joined by Luke,
That's me.
Will,
Hello.
and for the very first time, Will's younger brother, Andy.
Hi.
Now, to commemorate the recently passed 4th of July, we're going to be talking about something hugely related to American independence the Haitian Revolution. Confused? Well, stick around and we'll explore just how these two are related. We're also going to be covering so many revolutions that your head may be spinning by the end of this, but hopefully still attached to your neck.
Covering more than just the Haiti Revolution?
More than just the
Haitian?
Haitian Revolution. Yes, that's right. We're going to be talking American Revolution, French Revolution, and then potentially talking a bit more about what happens in South America following the liberation efforts of Simon Bolivar as well. But
As it turns out, there's a reason why all those flags are red, white, and blue.
yeah, there is a big reason, and it's not just because everyone liked France. No, in fact, for some, they probably didn't like France a whole lot. Case in point, Haiti. But yeah, let's start off. Let's start off with a location here. We're talking about Haiti nowadays, but if we travel back to like the 1780s, there was no Haiti to speak about. Instead, what we had was this island known as Hispaniola in the Caribbean, and it was owned by the 1700s by two different countries. On the eastern end, we got what's known as Santo Domingo, a Spanish colony, nowadays known as the Dominican Republic. And then on the western side, the French took it over, and because they were super creative, they came up with the name of Saint Domingue, which is the French version of Santo Domingo. So we have Santo Domingo, the French, on the left, and we have Santo Domingo, the Spanish, on the right side. And it's the left side that we're focusing on, or the west side, rather, that we're focusing on for this episode.
A little
Saint
West
Domingue.
Side story.
Yeah, there you go. Our own colonial West Side story of
Now,
Saint Domingue.
Is it the Sharks or the Jets that we're talking about here?
Oh, we got a bit of all of them. We got the Sharks involved, we got the Jets involved, and we got ex-slavers involved.
Oh.
And yeah, man, if you thought West Side Story was a complex story of love and hate, this entire breakdown of the Haitian Revolution, we got a ton of different factions to play in.
I don't think
But,
it
like,
really was that complex.
This tiny little island,
It just sort of happened.
it did sort of happen, yeah, but like the way that people jumped into things, it was a very diverse set of interests at play here. And you'll see just how diverse, especially by the second episode. The first episode, we're just really bringing us to the start of the revolts themselves. But why Saint Domingue, this small little half an island? It's not even a whole island. Why does this little place get such a big focus? Well, maybe not contemporarily. Like I don't know if I've ever heard about Saint Domingue or the Haitian Revolution before college, but
We
like,
talked about it in high school once.
Can't say I have heard.
Once, yeah.
And Will, did it ever come up for you at all?
No, Well, but when would that would have been in like Euro, right? I don't think we ever talked about it then.
We did in US1, like American
It would
interest
be.
in
It,
South
it
America.
might be in U.S. history, yeah.
Or
That
world
makes sense.
history.
No, not world history. That was like, we did
Yeah, it was a lot of...
non-European, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, arguably, you could see influences from European history touching this too. Like,
But anyway, yes.
Oh, of course.
yeah,
Not
like
the point is that it's not exactly the most
it's not the
studied
most
topic.
talked about. Exactly, yeah. And yet somehow in my college courses, I've managed to have this pop up in 3 different classes. One about France and Africa, one about empires and nations, and then another one about European history since 1812. And so just the way that this tiny half an island keeps popping up, it's kind of surprising as to like how much focus was given to it.
Why does the other half have big significance like this half?
Santo Domingo?
Yeah.
They were a bit less mad.
Santo Domingo
Actually,
kind of was
colonies.
part of the bigger kind of like American colonial uprisings against the Spanish. So like it falls into a bigger narrative. Whereas like the Haitian Revolution was like it was the first like European colony with like a predominantly slave population that rose up, and then it became like run by the former slaves themselves. Whereas like for the others, we see like various systems which tended to favor what's known as the Creoles, people that are like either mixed descent, like they might have, or in most of the cases, just people who are like of white ancestry, but they grew up their entire time, like their entire lives in the colonies rather than back in Europe. And so it was like a weird like class system based on that as well. So this one really turned the whole racial class divide on its head in a very revolutionary way, if you will.
You could say it is a racial clash as well.
It was very much a racial clash as well. But let's start with like why do we care about this and why the rest of the world cared about Saint Domingue as this colony back in the day. So this half an island by the 18th century was the French American colony of that time period. And basically, the way that things worked out, this half an island was responsible for half of the Western world's supply of sugar and coffee.
Half.
And we're talking about...
So if we collected the entire island, we would be ultimately all powerful?
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, because like it was a surprisingly, I mean, I guess you could say efficient, but like in a very brutal sense. It was a surprisingly efficient plantation system that they set up in St Domingue. That like Santo Domingo, like the Spanish did try to set up colonies, but at this point it kind of fell into like a side station, and most of the focus was more on like mining silver in Peru or trying to find gold in the rest of the Americas, and like running all those other plantations and just trying to keep the mines and the industry in that area going. So France was really chugging ahead with this tiny like foothold in the Americas here, and just really churning out a lot of supply. And especially
Wouldn't this have been before the Louisiana Purchase?
This was before the Louisiana Purchase, yeah. In fact, this is before that even belonged to Spain, to France. That was still technically part of Spain at this time. Napoleon kind of has a role in turning that into a more French holding.
Right.
But yeah, and that comes up later on too, how the Louisiana Purchase goes down. But basically, huge exporter of like raw goods in terms of sugar and coffee. And to fuel that kind of like industrial creation of sugar and coffee, they also brought in a huge amount of slave labor to keep that supply chain going. And we're talking about potentially, I think I read somewhere that this was the largest spot in the Americas in terms of the slave trade, in terms of how many slaves they brought into this area.
Yeah, it was one of the, it's how they got slaves from Africa to the U.S., continental U.S. They brought them to Haiti.
Yeah, this was like a stopping point for the slave trade, and also for a lot of slaves, the ultimate destination that they're going to be going to. We're talking about a system in which the vast majority of slaves in Saint Domingue were freshly I hesitate to call them immigrants, forced relocated Africans who would come over and ultimately die within like the first 20 years of their lives in Saint Domingue. So just to like constantly keep feeding this machine that's just churning humans into sugar and coffee, it was just eating up. Basically, it became like around a third of the total slave trade in like the triangle trade, between the Americas, Europe, and in Africa. It took up about a third of the total slave trade in the process, just to keep things going.
That's real nasty.
Yeah.
And then also that meant that Europe could afford to ban slavery in itself because it had the colonies still. Because a lot of Europe banned slavery.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, France at this point had this rule in which, any person of color who steps foot in France is automatically free. To the point where there was a slave servant who ran away from his master when he went to France with his master, and then claimed that since he's now in France, he's technically a free person. And there was a whole court case about this.
Did he win?
I think he won, but then the way that they rectified things is that they created new slave codes.
People had tricks to get around these sorts of things, didn't they? I know Washington rotated his slaves because there was a rule in, I think, Pennsylvania, right? If the slave is in Pennsylvania for 6 months, they become free, but he rotated them out at 5 months.
Yeah, no, people definitely
Yeah.
played around with it. But at the end of the day, in order to preserve this super lucrative colony, because this thing alone was like one of the biggest things keeping France's economy afloat during this time period, they basically created laws that restricted any people of color, regardless of whether or not they were free men of color or we're talking about slaves, from coming into France proper. And then they also removed, like, they allow like certain caveats, which would allow slaves, I think, to follow their masters for like a brief stint in mainland Europe, France. So they were conscious of this, and it was like a very weird thing that they were trying to do. But at the same time, they basically fell more on the side of the slave owners, ultimately to preserve the whole economy system.
Wow.
And yeah,
Never happened before.
It was pretty bad. But the thing is, once again, this was brutal working conditions. So brutal, in fact, that the Spanish, who tried their less, kind of less efficient, if you will, plantation system on the island of Hispaniola, wiped out the local indigenous people effectively, because of
like genocide level.
Like genocide, because the forced labor conditions was just so bad, and that parents would ultimately kill their kids rather than have them live through the system.
I'm pretty sure that all the genocides in this period were the most like effective at killing people. I know like 90% of the native population was wiped out in like 10 years.
Yeah, no, it was a surprisingly
they were rather good at it.
Yeah. And like, once again, I'm saying that the Spanish side was not nearly as brutally efficient as the French. So you could imagine that the Spanish, after they wiped out the indigenous population in these islands, they then moved on to slave labor from Africa. And the French took that and they were like, well, now we have an unlimited supply of manpower, so we could just work them to the bone and it's perfectly fine. So as a result, there was, once again, a huge amount of freshly imported African slaves to the colony of St Domingue, and also a very high mortality rate for those working in those plantations. And that's not counting the mortality rate of those who die en route across the Atlantic. That's around 13%. But basically, around the eve of the French Revolution in 1789, the breakdown of the population of this colony is around 30,000 whites, 28,000 free blacks, otherwise known as jeunes de couleur, people of color, and around 450 to 500,000 slaves.
Jeez, that's like 1 to 10.
No, it really was. The ratio was absurd in terms of that. And as a result, you could imagine that there was always some tensions going on. But the tensions wasn't necessarily race-based tension. It was more about slaves and non-slaves for the most part. Just to get this into like some sense of proportion, the free blacks, those 28,000 free blacks, controlled about a third of the total slave population in St Domingue. So it's not like black men were not enslaving fellow blacks. And this is going to be, I guess, a class divide, if you will, that plays into the larger Haitian revolution that comes about later on. It is also key to know that the free blacks some of them were wealthy merchants as well, who had wealth that would rival a lot of those more recently immigrated over Frenchmen who were trying to find their fortunes in St Domingue. And a lot of them tended to be people of mixed ancestry. So they might have a white grandfather or a white father somewhere in their heritage. But the big thing that... Yeah. So as a result of their mixed ancestry, there was always some racial divides going on between the whites and the blacks. But the big thing that kept them kind of rallied together at the end of the day was the need to be able to keep the slave population in check. And in fact, oftentimes the free blacks would be instrumental in patrolling and capturing escaped slaves or marooned slaves, people that ran off and formed like little small communities out of the settled plantation areas. And it's also key to know that there's still a big wealth divide between the whites as well. There are a lot of big, wealthy, rich plantation owners, but also a lot of like poorer whites too. But the poor whites always had this idea that because they're white, they are inherently superior to blacks. It wouldn't always manifest in a lot of ways, but oftentimes the legal codes would allow whites more privileges than blacks would. And that was just the way things were in the colonies. So, I promised to make this connect to the American Revolution. And here's how it happens. So, in 1776, a small collection of colonies in North America, I'm not sure if you've heard about them, decided that, enough is enough, right? We're going to stand up to our parent country and say, we're going to be independent from now on. And you can't tax us. You can't decide our trade. You can't do any of that stuff. And for the big plantation owners in St Domingue, when they hear about these colonies rising up, demanding more autonomy and more control over their own trade rights, they're like, oh, well, I mean, they might be onto something there,
So this is not the slaves. This is the plantation.
This is the
owners.
wealthy. Yes, this is the wealthy plantation owners, predominantly white plantation owners too, who are like looking at the newspapers and reading about this because they're thinking to themselves, we're kind of attached to this sinking ship of France. Like France's economy has gone down ever since it fought the 7 Years' War against Great Britain, and like we're basically helping bail out the French government at this point because of how much money we're making off of our trade. And like you got to keep them
breadwinners.
Yeah, exactly. They're the ones contributing all this stuff, and they're not like really seeing quite what the French government's doing to help them, aside from potentially offering military support in case of large slave rebellions. But like that's not gonna happen, right? We got this under control. So, for them,
there's only 500,000 slaves. How could they rise up?
500,000 slaves to 30,000 whites. It's gotta be fine. Everything's fine.
I mean, if you think about it, one white dude is worth about 10 black dudes.
That's what they thought in terms of the ratios.
Easy.
Yeah. And also there were, to be fair, a lot of laws put in place that prevented blacks from ever getting close enough to be able to handle weapons and be able to like congregate in any like real serious way. And reading, like literacy was also a big thing too, and being able to communicate across these communities as well. Because keep in mind, once again, these are slaves that came from Africa, from all the various groups in various regions of Africa, but around Central Africa for the most part. So as a result, they have their own language barriers to work out between each other. Never mind the stuff that they have to do to learn the communication of their masters. So like,
and the cultures were very ethnically different as well.
Exactly. So like, it's hard to think of this as like slavery in the American South, where like there's multi-generations of African American slaves who speak English, who have some sort of a unified culture that they can rally around.
That is very different.
It is, yeah. So that's a key thing to understand. And this makes it like all the more difficult for these slaves to be able to rise up. But there was something that they did have in common. And it was this like a hybrid kind of like religion cultural thing called voodoo, which brought in a lot of different spiritual beliefs under like a bigger umbrella and allowed them to be able to practice some sort of a community. So around this time especially, voodoo was starting to take off amongst the slave population themselves. So there were definitely some more murmurings of rallying together and being able to push back against slavery. But by no means was it a large force at this time. So once again, American Revolution happens for, taxation without representation, and ultimately the idea about like being able to control their own ability to determine their economic rights in a lot of ways. So the rich are like, well, I mean, I wouldn't mind being rid of France and being able to decide which countries we trade with, rather than France trying to monopolize our entire trade and having to make us deal with high trade tariffs with other countries. So, much like Star Wars Episode 1, it starts off with trade disputes. Yeah.
Good analogy.
It's always about Star Wars with this motherfucker.
You know it. But the best part is that revolution didn't end in 1781 when America was able to knock the Brits out of Yorktown. In 1789, we have the stirrings of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, and the whole French Revolution sweeping across in Paris. And obviously, those rich white planters were like, oh, looks like it's going to happen after all. So in the colonies, they were actually pretty excited too. As I said before, the rich whites wanted this ability to have freer trade policies and also like a lot more local control on how to handle things in their own colonies. And the free blacks also saw this, especially with the idea of Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, and this whole idea about equality, fraternity, and brotherhood. No, Wait, I think I messed up.
Liberty, equality, and fraternity.
Yes, fraternity, equality, and fraternity. No, equality, liberty.
You need some help.
And fraternity. No, liberty, equality, and fraternity. I got it.
You got it.
Liberté, égalité, fraternité.
I did say it like a minute ago.
Fraternity.
I was getting there. I did I say fertility?
I don't think you ever said fertility. You're good.
No.
Don't worry about that so much.
Yeah. That's still a liberty that China's not giving everyone. But anyways, with the stirrings of this liberty, equality, fraternity going on, the free blacks were like, yo, this might finally make us like equal citizens to white people. So like, be able to vote, be able to travel freely, be able to visit France without being kicked out. So there was a lot of positivity behind the ideas of the revolution in 1789. So as a result, St Domingue, seeing itself as a very powerful colony in the grand scheme of things, sent a few delegates over to France. So they dropped by the National Assembly. They're like, mon ami, this revolution is wonderful, isn't it? We finally have more say. We're going to finally free the economy. This is like a libertarian dream. This is amazing. And then they run into a few people who apparently were more serious about the liberty aspect of liberté, égalité, and fraternity. In fact, there were... Because like you got to keep in mind, once again, mainly in France, slavery wasn't a big deal. Like it was a very low, if not straight up non-existent, slave population in France itself. So for a lot of these people, they saw this as a chance to be able to right a lot of the moral wrongs of France, and just be able to transition out of this. Like, who needs slavery anymore? In fact, there were some very powerful speakers, such as the priest Abbé Gregory, who goes on and pushes for the abolition of slavery in France, like colonies included.
I imagine the delegates are suddenly thinking, that's not really letting us control our economic freedom.
Yeah, no, they're like, they drop into the National Assembly. They're like, yes, finally, we're about to get our autonomy. We're going to get our free trade rights. We're going to be able to visit France on a more regular basis. This is wonderful. We could trade with the other half of the island that we're attached to. It's like, yes, it's controlled by the Spanish, but like that border's just arbitrary, like Spanish, French, money is money, at the end of the day. So like for them, they saw this as a wonderful chance, and they come in here and they're like, Abbé Gregory, it's been a while. What have you been working on? Well, you see, I've been working on this treatise called The Abolition of Negro Slavery. I'm sorry, what now? Well, yeah, you must agree that slavery is a terrible thing to treat people to. It's like, well, I mean, it's not bad when you're making money from it. You should try that sometime, Father. But, okay, whatever you say. Maybe he's just a weirdo. He's probably the odd one out, And then there's like, and they like turn the corner and then they see like the Abolition League. And they're like, wait, hold on, there's more of you? Oh my god. And then they're like going around, and like the strange thing is that they have a lot of how should I put it, nuance on slavery as a whole. So there were some that, this is the rare minority, which was like full on abolish slavery now. These are the Jacobins, which at this point weren't a big deal yet. They're the very radical, like, let's spread republicanism across the world kind of folks. Which America, yeah, which like America.
I always thought it was Jacobin. Is that wrong?
It is Jacobin. It is Jacobin. Yeah.
Okay.
But like, this whole radical, like, we gotta spread the revolution all across the world. We gotta really put our money where the mouth is, even though we're completely bankrupt. But like, we'll print more money and then we'll put that where our mouth is. And then America in the background is like, woo, yeah, revolution, do it, it's good. And then there was like a more moderate wing, which was like, well, like, abolition is good. Like, we think it's a terrible thing that people have to live in slavery, but like, we can't do it right now. Like, our economy's already kind of bad. We don't want to tank it by losing St Domingue and like all the plantation stuff. So like, let's do a gradual phase out of slavery, Like, we'll give it 10 years. And then eventually, after those 10 years, we'll somehow have come up with a system that allows all these black slaves to become black citizens. Wait, you want black citizens? Oh, okay, we'll vote on that next. But like, they'll not be slaves anymore. And then there were some others who were like, you know what the real problem with slavery is? The fact that we're kidnapping black people. That's the bad part. The slave trade is the worst thing possible. Once they're in our care, I mean, that's fine. That's great. We'll deal with that. They could stay slaves, whatever. But we should end the slave trade. That is what's really bad, you know? We should end the slave trade because that's basically kidnapping people, and that is how we should deal with it. And then still others were like, no, you got it backwards, bruh. Slavery is bad, but the slave trade is good. You see what I mean?
So they take them in the slave trade, and then what happens after? Do they just...
We civilize them. Duh.
Oh, that's right.
We give them proper Christian educations, and then we'll consider freeing them after a while.
We give them homes.
Yeah, so we'll have like an endless 10-year cycle for these people. You know, we kidnap them, 14% of them die on the way over to the colonies, they work for 10 years, and then we turn them into upright Catholic citizens of France. You want black citizens in France? Okay, we'll talk about that later, Jacques. We'll come to that later. But, so yeah, obviously you could see there was a huge divide going on. But the takeaway basically is the delegates coming back and being like, bro, we can't let word of this shit come back to the island. So you could just see them coming back, and it's like, oh, Jean, how was your visit to Paris? It's like, oh, terrible. Quarantine the ships, make sure no one leaves here, and we're going to have a conference. Stat. It's like, what's going on? It's like, there's some nut jobs in France who apparently think liberty means liberty for slavery. They're like, no, surely that just means liberty from trade embargoes and high tariff rates, right? That's what liberty means. That's what everyone thinks liberty means nowadays, right? It's like libertarianism. That's the idea. No trade restrictions, no economics restrictions. This is our property we're dealing with here. That's right. Okay. No one gets a word of this Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen bullshit. That's not going to go out there. No one's going to hear about this. We're going to shut things down. We'll pretend like the French Revolution has not happened in St Domingue. Okay? So,
there is no revolution in St Domingue.
Pretty much, yeah. And they're just they're absolutely terrified that any news from France is going to come here. So they're intercepting news ships. They're censoring the information coming out. And the rich white planters have basically formed their own little autonomous committee at this point. Just to really restrict information here. Because the moment anyone who's either black and or a slave gets wind of what's going on in the mainland in Europe, they might be emboldened to try and throw a revolt.
They would never.
They would never.
Absolutely not.
There's only 500,000 of them.
50,000.
Oh, yeah.
Wait, no, 500,000.
500, yeah.
Yeah, 50,000 in terms of the whites and free blacks put together, thereabouts. So, they're able to keep things under wraps for a bit. You know, a tiny bit. But, even without the use of Twitter, without Facebook, information still leaks.
News cycles were a little longer back then.
Hey, boss, what do you do when you travel to France for 2 months?
Yeah, it's oh, we just went there to visit the Eiffel Tower. What is the Eiffel Tower? Oh, it's a small church tower built in Eiffel. I don't know what it is yet. It doesn't exist. I don't know. You're lying to me. There's no Eiffel Tower. Oh, you see right through me, Jacques. But I tell you this. They're certainly not talking about liberty for slaves, no? Oh, there's no liberty for slaves. Oh, liberté, égalité, fraternité is definitely not the catchphrase of the revolution. I'm sorry,
this is possibly the worst accent I've ever heard in my entire life.
You forgot to say baguette and croissant.
I did forget to say that, yeah. Yeah, maybe that was their excuse. They went there for some baguettes and croissant. But either way...
That's why they didn't believe him.
Either way, the news does slip out. And it slips out to a prominent Jean de Couleur, a free black by the name of, I want to say Auger? It's spelled O-G-E. I don't know why. I think ogre every single time I see it. But Auger.
Bourgeoisie.
No. Let's just
it's
go with
not Auger.
I feel like Auger gives it more gravitas.
Yeah.
it just
No,
me?
oh hey, that's Spanish. That wouldn't be.
Oh hey is what you say when you run into someone that you forgot their name.
Eh.
Oje. That's the name of
Oh, you.
Yeah. Oh hey. Especially with the face
Isn't
masks
there-
nowadays, you never quite know who it is right off the bat.
Isn't there a basketball player with like, no, that's with like Ohe as his name?
Like actually pronounced oh hey.
No, I have no idea. I think his first name is Semi.
His first name is what?
Semi.
Semi.
Yeah,
I've never even seen a basketball before, dude. Don't ask me.
fair enough.
I wouldn't know.
So basically, Oje gets news about this, and
Oh wait, Will's right. It's Semi Ogele.
Semi Ojele. That does sound French, doesn't it?
I don't know if it's
Or
pronounced like
Ogele.
that, but
Yeah.
that's what it is. I'm gonna have to cut in here. I'm gonna have to
Oh, it's
get
Oj.
going now. So you'll be noticing that I'm going silent.
All right, you'll pop in for the second part, I'm assuming then, hey?
Yeah.
All right, I'll see you later, Luke.
Laters.
So basically, Oje gets news that
It's apparently Oj.
Oj?
According to this pronounced names YouTube video.
It's called Oj.
Oj.
Okay, so Oj gets news that there's this whole like revolution actually happening in France, and he's like, you know what? It's time that we get all free blacks equal citizenship as free whites. Like that's the whole point of a revolution, right? Like that's definitely going to be happening. I'm sure America's just 5 years away from doing that themselves.
Easy.
Yeah, easy peasy lemon squeezy. Equal rights for people of different colors. It's easy, So he goes ahead and he gives this declaration to a group of assembled free blacks and free whites. And he's like, you know what? Slavery is kind of a problem, And like, the word's going to get out sooner or later to the slaves that, number one, they outnumber us 10 to 1. And number two, that they actually have the support of mainland France, or a good portion of support from mainland France. So, like, if you're going to want things to be kept under wraps, two things. Number one, you're going to need the support of all the free blacks to keep those slaves in line until we can figure out a good enough solution for them. And number two, we got to figure out how we're going to get rid of this slavery thing. Because, like, if we keep this going, there's going to be blood, yo. Like, I ain't threatening nobody, but I'm just saying, I don't think people like being slaves, Hot
People weren't
take.
very good at conspiracies
Hot
back
take.
then.
Oh, no, people were good at conspiracies. America was really good with conspiracies.
Oh,
It was just
yeah, that's
more
true.
about, like, religious groups. It was always, like, about the Pope, the Papists, the Catholics are
Yeah.
trying to kill us Protestants. So, not so much on slave revolts. Not yet, anyways. They definitely get keyed in more on this later on. So, he goes in, and he's like, we should probably consider, negotiating some terms. We make up 28,000 of the population of free folks, like 2/3 of the total free population here. So, like, you might need our support to keep the slaves in check. And also, we should talk about how we're going to end this slavery thing. Not because mind you, I like money just rolling into my bank account, but I don't want the island to catch on fire and all the whites to be slaughtered. You know what I mean? So, like,
Passive
we should
income.
probably address this. And, the white planters, after receiving this free black man's advice, sat around, they thought it through, and they decided, you know what, this guy's right. We should abolish slavery within 15 years, and we should give equal citizenship to our fellow free citizens, regardless of color, because this is the age of the revolution. And then they lived happily ever after, and then they renamed themselves Haiti, and they were the champions against slavery in the Americas.
God, they're good.
Yeah, no, that didn't
They
happen.
didn't.
No, far from it. In fact, he was just kicked out, pretty much. He was booed out of the area, and seeing that he didn't get any sympathy from the free whites at this point, he was like, you know what? We're going to start a rebellion. So he goes ahead, he rallies together a group of free blacks. He explicitly made them free blacks, rather than including slaves in his revolt as well, because he did want to keep slavery for a period and slowly phase it out. And he tries to go on this rampage, and it fails miserably. Like, I think it went down in a course of 2 weeks. Like, if you thought John Brown's attempt to, like, raise hell in Harper's Ferry was like a pitiful attempt. Oj here didn't do so hot. So he gets captured and he gets put to death by breaking at the wheel. Like, we're going like real medieval on this shit. You know, you tie someone to a wheel and just like take a hammer and you smash their limbs one at a time. And as a result, the rebellion fails. But at this point, all the whites are now like keyed in on the fears of free blacks, not slaves, free blacks being the real problem here. So they're like, oh shit, we gotta arm ourselves, we gotta form our own little patrols, we gotta be ready, we gotta be vigilant here, yo. And on the flip side, Oj's death, probably more than his life and his attempt to create a revolt, just his death and the brutal way that he was executed, as well as the paranoia surrounding the whites following his attempt to foment a rebellion, actually sparks the free blacks to rally together and push for greater demands.
That's a lot like John Brown then.
Just yeah, it is. And like
martyrdom, it's always good.
Exactly, yeah. So it actually like rallies people together and they push it through. And the National Assembly, meanwhile, is like, whoa, did you see that? There was almost a rebellion in our colony. You know, like we probably should like address the issue here. We don't want things to get out of hand. Like, this was almost disastrous, you know? 20 people almost caused a rebellion. That's terrifying, yo. So they go ahead and they actually grant equal citizenship to most free blacks. There's conditions to it, but at least the path to citizenship is now available to black people.
I feel like you're gearing up for like one giant butt.
And that pissed off a lot of white people. So
there it is.
So like the free black population, the jeunes de couleur of St Domingue were celebrating in the streets, and the whites were like, hold up, we can't have this happen. Especially the poor whites, who, once again, you got to keep in mind, literally the only thing keeping them higher in society than these free blacks, a lot of whom, the free blacks, once again, they've lived here for generations, they've built up their own local wealth, is the fact that they could say, but I'm white and you're black, so I have more privileges as a free white citizen to you black people. So there's a huge backlash against this. And the National Assembly, you know, kind of just backs down. It's like,
yeah,
they're like, oh, okay. We thought like 20 angry black people having a revolt is terrifying, but these guys are about to go full on United States Declaration of Independence on us. So like, we don't want St Domingue to go independent. Let's just placate them. Let's rescind that. That's fine, right? Like, it only went into effect for a few days. No one's gonna even know what happened. It's fine. Everything's fine. Meanwhile, the streets of Paris are burning, and now we're considering potentially guillotining our freaking king. But it's fine. Everything is fine.
Yeah. It'll work.
Just normal fine things, you know?
Yeah, as it is.
Yeah, now, people getting their heads cut off does tend to happen when things are fine.
Yeah, and besides, we heard about this new thing called a guillotine. We're thinking about testing it out, but we haven't done anything with it yet. So let's try it first before we start dealing with these revolts in the colonies. So whereas Oj's death may have like prompted some activism on behalf of the freed blacks, the fact that they got a taste of like equal citizenship for just like a brief moment, and then had it pulled away from them, just fucking yoinked out of their mouths, that was arguably like the spark that really triggered the revolts. So at this point, we see free blacks banding together. Because keep in mind, these free blacks did serve an active role in suppressing the slaves by like joining slave patrols and like fighting in the mountains. So like, we're not talking about just like people who are like sitting, like, you know, sitting comfortably off on the sidelines. These are people who are actively engaged in both the domestic politics and also a lot of the domestic militia responsibilities as well. So they have their own guns, they have their own ammunition, and they start banding together to fight against the whites. So we see skirmishes and battles popping up all across the colony of St Domingue. And you can imagine, at this point, between the free blacks and the free whites duking it out, all of a sudden, the slaves are like, yo, I mean, like, you don't know me that well, I don't know you that well, but I do know this. we're slaves. It sucks. And it looks like our slave masters are too busy trying to kill each other than to deal with us, you know? So, like, maybe now's the time for a slave revolt? Slave revolt? Did anyone say slave revolt? Yes. I volunteer. Mm-hmm. So, as a result, the slaves start rising up on the plantations. And I don't want this to sound like it's a unified effort. Because once again, remember, keep in mind, we are dealing with a large population of people who don't even speak the same language, who have different cultural backgrounds, who have different understandings of St Domingue itself, and like different educational levels as well. But they're all starting to rise up. And some of the messaging is able to trickle down too. So for a few of them, they claim that, the king gave us freedom when we came here. Kind of like twisting the idea about like, if you're in France, you're automatically a free person. And also that like, the king has lost power. So like if the king's in charge, if he's lost power, does that mean we're free? So like, I think that works. So some people take that messaging. The king gave us freedom. So we are just taking back our rights, the rights that we're given. Others say that, we're not revolting because of just like freedom alone. We're revolting because y'all don't know what the church or what the king wants anymore. We are the true loyalists. So you can imagine slaves who are holding up the church, like the Pope, and the king, Louis XVI, as like their idols. And they're just basically going forward saying they're fighting to rid themselves of the revolution, not to give themselves freedom. But the freedom is cool too if they can get that on the side.
Yeah, so it's some weird messaging, like while this revolution is happening in France, they're not trying to associate themselves with it.
Yeah, if anything, they're trying to be like, we are anti-revolutionaries here, which is why we should be free and we should be given a chance to put down these heathen, anti-Christ, like slave owners who now don't believe in the king and the church. It's kind of weird. The messaging does get a bit twisted. And then still others who are like, guys, it's in the fucking motto, liberty, equality, fraternity. Let's just use that and run with it, So there were some who just took the revolution to its like full messaging and tried to push for that. And as a result of this, they start burning plantations throughout St Domingue. And as they start becoming a more and more powerful force, you see the free blacks themselves splitting as well. You see some of the free blacks actually siding with the slaves who are revolting. And then still others who actually make temporary truces with the white plantation owners to put down the slave revolts. So it's a whole web of just different alliances and different motivations, all revolving around the idea of, number one, what does it mean to be an equal citizen in France? Like, does color matter? And number two, slavery. Is it a good thing? Should we have it? Two very intriguing questions, which to some extent still plague us to this day. And all this chaos, it leads to a lot of the richest plantation owners being like, you know what? I'm out. I got a summer home in like Bordeaux. Fuck this shit. I'm going back to France. So they duck out. They're fleeing St Domingue. And all this chaos is erupting as plantations catch fire. The most wealthy plantation for France, arguably the wealthiest plantation in all of the Americas, is now burning down. And this chaos, as well as the panicked refugees who are fleeing out of there, start spreading this message of this once powerful and potent plantation just dissolving into chaos, ripe for the taking. And as the message of chaos and paradise spreads, it spreads to a lot of corners. France obviously is pretty concerned because what they thought was the worst of the slave revolts, 20 armed men arguing for equal citizenship, is now just like the least of their worries, and now they're dealing with a full-on colony in flame. But also, it travels over to Britain and to Spain as well. Britain, who's still a bit sore about the French helping America, the American colonies win their independence, and thinking, maybe this one will make it back, in terms of the tax revenue. And Spain, which is like, hold on un momentito. They're on the same island as us. And the French kind of just did take over the western half of the island, so I think it's high time that we just take it back. So, to end this episode, and to set up the next episode, we're starting with Chaos in Paradise. France is now trying to get itself involved, and Britain and Spain are starting to look into this chaotic situation and St Domingue with some interest. And of course, we have white slave owners, black slave owners, and black slaves all fighting for a whole mess of different causes at this point. One hell of a revolution, isn't it?
And so 100 slaves drop into Haiti, and the last one to survive gets to be a citizen.
Many different ways for this to play out. But that's going to be for the next episode. For now, this is Noteworthy History. Thanks for joining me, and we'll hear back from you guys next week.